Very much, Jeremy. How's that? That's no, that's not
Not firing all.
firing all four cylinders. Fantastic, off mute.
There you are, Neil.
How's that? Oh, great. Can I just say, because I'm a Methodist preacher, I've got a full text, so I don't wax lyrical. But it also means I stick to time, and there'll be a chance for people to see the text afterwards. So don't worry about scribbling things down. I'm hoping to provoke things. I do want to say one aside, though, which I can't resist. It's so nice to have a new Russian leader who's stated his intention of only serving for 3 years. So you become Prime Minister next, don't you? I'd like to thank Jeremy for the invitation to address this forum, and I don't do so to bring my answers to current issues in mental health chaplaincy, but to provoke conversation. And those who have suffered my presence at the wonderful online forums which Jeremy's introduced over the last couple of years will know that I'm not shy of raising questions, but whether my own contribution towards finding answers is of enduring value, I'll leave you to judge. I'm not competent to judge it myself. I want to spend this session thinking not just about where mental health chaplaincy is, but where it might be in the future. I've been involved in 2 national level conversations in the past year, which are pertinent to our future as a profession. The first set of conversations have been about the rewrite of the National Chaplaincy Guidelines, and the second set of conversations have been about whether it's possible to set up a nationally recognised apprenticeship in chaplaincy. In both of them, involving different people in NHS England, I've been grappling with not just what chaplaincy is, not even what mental health chaplaincy is, but more importantly, how we get people outside chaplaincy to understand what we're for. It was good in Jean Fletcher's 2019 book, Chaplaincy and Spiritual Health in Mental Health Settings, to see a chapter written by 2 psychiatrists extolling the value of mental health chaplaincy. And I count both of them, Lucy Greenwade and Chris Cook, as friends, and I've worked alongside both of them. I supervised Lucy's research during her training period. But both Lucy and Chris are active Christians. Chris is a priest. And therefore they already understand firsthand the vital role of spirituality in people's lives. I'm more impressed when people outside a faith background understand what we're about when we come to see patients. And for this reason, I have been delighted to welcome humanist colleagues to our team. I believe that it has strengthened our ability to show that we are not simply here as religious functionaries or to promote one worldview. And I think that as we've increased humanist presence, it has strengthened the voice of chaplaincy. Helping people understand what chaplaincy is for became much easier after the first chaplaincy guidelines were published in 2003. And the review of them in 2015 was helpful in its, albeit very cursory, description of the distinctiveness of mental health chaplaincy. But it's important that such guidelines in the future have an influence on decision-making by trusts. They're not internal documents for chaplaincy teams. So it's been a privilege for me to have represented you, even if you didn't know I was representing you, on the Chaplaincy Guidelines Working Group as mental health chaplains. So I was the mental health chaplaincy representative. There were other mental health chaplains present in other capacities. And our task was to define what we wanted from the chaplaincy guidelines and then to help the people who won the contract to rewrite them to do that task. And as part of this, I offered a critique of the 2015 guidelines where I felt they needed improvement and clarification and where I felt they needed to go. And along with other stakeholders, I was able to comment on the draft that the writers produced. The final draft is now with NHS England, and although I'm not able to tell you what's in the new guidelines because they are now being deliberated on, nor am I able to share with you the confidential nature of the confidential discussions we had in the that working group, I don't see any problem in sharing with you my own submissions to that process.
May I ask, was it profitable?
Well, we'll find out, won't we?
Well, you know.
Well, no, I don't know. Not until NHS England have answered what the new guidelines are. So where we're at the moment is we're waiting for NHS England to look at the guidelines, see if they need tweaking, and then to come back to the working group and say, this is what we're proposing. And then we get a chance. So what is going to come out, even I will be hopefully pleasantly surprised. So that's the current expectation, that they'll be available later in the year. Although, as a Freedom to Speak Up guardian, we had a Freedom to Speak Up new Freedom to Speak Up national guidance that came out earlier on this year, and we waited a year for NHS England to actually deal with it. So I'm not holding my breath too much, especially the big changes in NHSE and the change of government are having an impact on the timescale. I also want to acknowledge that my submission was based on my conversations with colleagues, not least Jeremy, and other members of the Mental Health Forum, and so I don't take personal credit for all the ideas that were submitted and that I submitted on your behalf, but I want you to know what they were. I would hope that all that is good in the current guidelines remains in place. I was a bit horrified when they said they weren't going to revise the guidelines, they were going to totally rewrite them, write them afresh, and I said, well, I think you don't want to lose everything. And especially the statement, which it's under Chris Swift's name, so I presume he wrote it, which says this: recognising a person's spiritual dimension is one of the most vital aspects of care and recovery in mental health. People who use services increasingly wish to have services view them as whole persons in the context of their whole lives, and spirituality and faith is a vital element in that. I also want people to think about chaplains as an integral part of a mental health team. So, for example, my own trust opened a new unit 30 miles from the nearest chaplaincy base. No new money was allocated to chaplaincy, which meant that I had to stretch the existing team to cover this unit. And the context of mental health means we often have to travel large distances anyway, but it would be helpful if the guidelines reminded trusts that you cannot simply add to the existing work of chaplains with newly commissioned services without resourcing those additional service needs. Similarly, I'm aware that some trusts have sought to provide chaplaincy simply by the employment of 0 hours bank staff, with even the team leader employed on this basis. And the danger of this is it means that chaplaincy becomes episodic and functional, and it's brought in when requested, rather than being embedded in the ongoing provision to patients and staff. If a chaplaincy team is to be seen as an integral part of a trust team, best practice would indicate that a trust would normally employ its own chaplains, its own mental health chaplains, who are not parachuted in visitors. I believe that trusts reading the new guidelines, should they be good enough, should be reminded of what specific therapeutic inputs mental health chaplains bring, which cannot be offered by others, which is what we were thinking about in the last session, actually. Professor Douglas Davis, the theologian and anthropologist at Durham University, speaks of sacral authority, not as something which someone has inherent by virtue of their office, but as something offered by someone to another person who wishes to receive something from the person to whom they offer the authority. So, when a patient asks a chaplain for prayer, the authority to pray is conferred on the chaplain by the patient. even if the chaplain is a humanist and promises to ask another colleague to visit. Or when people are struggling to make sense of meaning and purpose and values of life, these spiritual questions invite chaplains to become involved. And this is especially the case when they need guidance with difficulties in relationships and with guilt from past actions. In forensic services, for instance, or even things they've done or lost while in treatment. And while psychodynamic psychotherapy may help people to identify the root of a problem, dealing with that root often requires the intervention of a person who has been accepted socio-culturally and anthropologically for a couple of 1,000 years as a person who can offer a form of release. And for the sake of clarity, I'm not simply speaking about Christian priests here. This often requires intensive, specialised clinical work, and chaplains should be resourced and trained for it. We'll have a chance to explore this in greater detail in my workshop tomorrow when we consider what happens when we view the mental health chaplain as a clinician. There's the advert for the session tomorrow. I also want to recognise here that even in mental health, there is specialism within mental health itself. So people specialise in young people's work or forensic or work with dementia care. And we need to take seriously the giftings and skills of different chaplains in order not to expect even mental health chaplains to be jacks of all trades in mental health. So in our trust, we do not work simply geographically, we work with giftings. As experts in spiritual care for those suffering from mental illness, chaplains should be equipped to resource other clinicians in their spiritual care of service users. And this demands that we learn how those other clinicians work. So everyone joining the team I lead is expected to read an introductory book explaining the essentials of diagnosis under DSM-5. They don't have to pass an exam in it, but it allows them to have some understanding of the medical conditions we encounter. We attend psychiatric seminars and lectures. I personally have this year undertaken an introductory course this year in psychodynamic psychotherapy, even if I can't say it. And to engage in these activities is not to pretend that we are medically trained or to be able to offer the same thing as other therapists. It does, however, allow us to speak their language as members of the multidisciplinary team and to be able to contribute in team meetings and to be able to identify wise interventions of our own as we work alongside other colleagues, but also to know how we can help others to think about spiritual care in their everyday interactions with patients. And most importantly, the presence of chaplains at such seminars and lectures has reminded those colleagues who are at those seminars of the serious nature of mental health chaplaincy and the value of chaplaincy to mental health recovery. The learning is two-way. In relation to that, all mental health chaplains should receive regular, structured clinical supervision, at least bi-monthly, as we aim in our trust, from others who are skilled and experienced in chaplaincy interventions. This may be offered through peer supervision. In our trust, we have a clinical lead chaplain. There should be specific training provision for those new to mental health chaplaincy. And larger departments should aim to have those specialist chaplains who will act as clinical leads. And as an aside, by the way, best practice is that all departments should be research aware, if not actually engaged in research themselves. So in our chaplain department, we have published several papers over the last couple of years as individual chaplains have looked at different areas of our work. There is a further implication, and that is that it would be helpful if the new guidelines highlight to trust that the specialist clinical role of mental health chaplains indicates that their work generally meets the tests of necessity and appropriateness for access to patients' medical records and attendance at multidisciplinary team meetings. Not everybody has access to Rio, and I think that diminishes the work of chaplains. In that respect, also, I think the 2019 Information and Governance Guidance on Chaplaincy, whilst setting out helpful guidance for acute hospital chaplaincy, is woefully inadequate for mental health chaplaincy. Clinical team leaders in our trust expect all staff working with patients to be fully conversant and up to date with the patients they're encountering. We cannot expect staff to have the time to offer handover meetings every time we go onto a ward. And if medical students have access to Rio and healthcare assistants, chaplains also ought to have access to those medical records and be engaging in them. There are three other areas where I've suggested that the 2015 guidelines are lacking. The first was the provision for community work. I'm sorry to say that the old guidelines suggesting a session a week for every 15 chronically ill service users was, to be polite, an inadequate statement. Not least because it uses the word chronically in such a crassly non-medical way to speak of people who are experiencing severe rather than chronic mental illness. So in our trust, we have 40,000 chronically ill patients. So that would mean we need another 250 chaplains. Hallelujah. But also because it doesn't measure clinical work in the way that other clinicians measure it. So I believe a better target would be to say that where a mental health trust operates community treatment teams, there should be a session a week in chaplaincy based on every 3 service users on the average community referrals caseload of the chaplaincy department. So our clinical teams have 30 caseload, they aim for that anyway. So similarly, chaplaincy could aim for that. Even 3 is pretty tight, 3 patients in a session where you have to travel between them. And by the way, as community teams in our trust have seen the value of chaplaincy interventions, and thus our referrals have increased in actual practice, so has our budget for chaplaincy. We have 155 community teams, it's a lot to engage with. Ideally, we want someone regularly with each one. In practice, I would argue that decisions about how many chaplains to employ in a mental health trust are not based on a calculation as to how many patients you serve and staff you can employ, but on 2 particular questions. Number 1, what on average are other trusts paying for chaplaincy? And number 2, what is the minimum amount we can get away with without complaints from the public or questions from the CQC? It doesn't take a mathematical genius to work out that establishment figures based on benchmarks and averages only drive down the average amount of money spent on chaplaincy. It harks back to the days of reference cost indexing, where trusts were told how they compared with other trusts and were told year on year to make cost savings, so they got down to the average. And the use of averages to produce targets led to the lack of a true benchmark. The second area that I believe the guidelines should specifically mention chaplaincy is to carers and families as a holistic service to those important people who are part of the triangle of care. I also believe that we should be involved in preventative work. What does that mean for mental health chaplaincy? It means that we should be engaging with faith communities and third sector organisations and even local businesses in order to equip them for the care of those they encounter who have mental health needs. The problem with health service commissioning is that clinicians are paid to work with a particular cohort of patients, but chaplains not being commissioned are freer to work beyond one-to-one work with patients in order to work with the scaffolding that supports their mental health in the community. chaplains are ideally situated to help people to know how to welcome and support people in cafes and shops as much as churches and mosques. In relation to the other national conversations we've been having, we also need a serious approach as to how people enter mental health chaplaincy. Placements can be helpful. One of our local vicars spent a week with us to test out her call to mental health chaplaincy, and the placement was successful in that it encouraged her to see that she wasn't cut out for it. We need, in the larger trust, to intentionally have training posts. Instead of being used to save money with Band 5 posts, we should use them for training. We shouldn't be using them to race to the bottom with cheaper wages. And although the current national conversation on chaplaincy apprenticeships has stalled, due to a widening of scope to include any sort of chaplaincy and the lack of someone currently to drive that conversation forward, it is, I believe, worth pursuing that we actually get an apprenticeship set up for a chaplaincy. For too long, we relied on Christian ordained people for chaplaincy, and chaplaincy is too important to leave it to them. And I speak as someone who entered mental health chaplaincy in 1998, simply because I was the ill-equipped local Methodist minister. Finally, the move to integrated care systems has forced trusts to work closer together and to share expertise. Where in that conversation is chaplaincy represented? There are three areas of work where we might follow mental health colleagues into offering specialist advice to non-mental health services. Listen carefully to this. You in the acute trust who say, where's the help? Firstly, our trust, like others, provides psychiatric liaison teams to acute hospitals to work alongside the clinicians who do not have mental health expertise. In a similar way, how may we as mental health chaplains support our acute trust colleagues? I myself have offered training to neighbouring acute chaplaincy teams in how to work better with patients suffering from dementia, and how to work with neurodiverse patients. Secondly, under the directive from NHS England that primary care networks appoint mental health workers in primary care settings who must be employed by mental health trusts, how can mental health chaplains offer support in those settings? As GP chaplaincy is growing, and as a great deal of GP work relates to people suffering from enduring mental illness, how may we resource spiritual care for those people in the population who need expert spiritual care from those who understand mental illnesses? In our own team, we offer ad hoc appointments to those referred to us by the primary care mental health workers. But it is a service which needs greater development. We did produce a paper on this last year, which is in the Healthcare Chaplaincy Journal. A particularly pressing problem for GPs is what they do with people with mental health difficulties in primary care who are falling through the gaps. They might be referred to secondary care but don't engage, so they're bounced back to the GP, or they're on a waiting list for several months. But they also have to wait several months for the chaplaincy support for which they'll become eligible once they, several months down the line, which they get from the trust they're referred to. How might we as chaplains work with the social prescribing link workers in primary care? And if you're wondering, as if we haven't got enough to do,
Carry on.
where the funding might come from for this, it isn't about adding to our work, it's about increasing it, getting the funding and employing people to do it. It is possible for primary care funding to be used intelligently to link together different pots of money. This might well open up a whole new funding stream for mental health chaplaincy, which I personally am actively exploring in our trust footprint area, and for which I think the time is right to explore as we move to integrated care boards seeking to facilitate working across trusts and between primary and secondary care. Thirdly, in what other contexts are our mental health nurses working where we might not have hitherto seen the need for chaplaincy, but nevertheless demand has been discovered? For example, we have mental health facilities within our local prisons, which are staffed by our trust, who are under contract to those prisons to offer mental health care. There are some mental health aspects of the spiritual needs of the prisoners which the prison chaplains feel ill-equipped to meet. And so we've given input from our own mental health chaplaincy team. We've also not historically offered chaplaincy through our street triage teams, who are out on a Saturday night alongside the police, picking up those who need to go to a Section 136 suite. Such is the pressure on beds that often they stay longer than they should in these suites. How are chaplains offering a service there? And what about those of you whose trusts offer a courts diversion service? Are the members of that team able to offer chaplaincy to relatives who turn up to support a loved one at their trial, only to find out that they are deemed by the duty psychiatrist to be mentally ill, incapable of standing trial, and have suddenly been sectioned? The carers need support at that time. In conclusion, in my last 24 years in mental health chaplaincy, I have seen a huge shift and a great expectation of expertise in what we as a profession offer. The conversation will no doubt continue. I hope you find it helpful that I've dropped these pebbles in the pond, and I hope you are as interested as I am to see on which banks the ripples wash up.
I knew, or had an inkling, Neil, that I thought you should be the person to come and speak to us, and I thought that was absolutely right. That was fantastic. Absolutely pertinent, relevant, thought-provoking, challenging, and related to our speciality. It's fantastic. I think we've got plenty of time, actually. You've thrown out so many things, and I think it would be amiss not to maybe pick up some questions from the floor.
So in our trust, we currently have 3 chaplains, but they have stopped community chaplaincy. We can't see it in regulations, it's all in motion. So by law is it required, or is it discretionary?
Who's they? When you say they have stopped community chaplaincy?
Well, basically those in senior positions of leadership.
Who?
England and Wiltshire Mental Health Partnership.
Yeah, but which office holders in position? The chief executive?
I think he was involved in the decision. I'm not spoken to him directly, but yeah.
So I think. Oh, is that sorry? So so what basically the trust is saying is that not all your patients are entitled to have chaplaincy.
Yeah.
Well, that should be pushed back on.
We did. We can get to it.
Is that somewhere where you might think about contacting the College of Healthcare chaplains to formally engage with them as a professional body to say, because that's what we do in doctors. If doctors are told they can see some of the patients, so why can't we as a college? We can write.
So, I mean, so I've mentioned that we actually go outside our trust to people. We see it's our task as mental health chaplains to stop people becoming patients with us.
I get it.
I'm
for it. But I'm saying, so I was doing limited, so primarily I wanted to train patients. But when a chaplain who was 50% limited, had to stop. So, but it's asking the question, are they legally obliged? I get where you're coming from totally, and I support it, but we're not in.
So there's no, as far as I understand, there's no legal obligation, like there is in the prison service, to appoint a chaplain. But there are questions to be asked about the proper care of patients if you fail to do that. And when the CQC are looking at holistic care, I mean, I do get irritated that the CQC don't consistently inspect chaplaincy departments, you might think, oh, it's a good job they don't. But actually, if they did, and you were found to be wanting, there'd be a huge case for your trust saying, hang on a minute, the CQC want a proper service from this chaplain department, and you're not funding it. So that actually would be helpful to you. So one of the things we got into as a trust, it was 2015, we ensured that the CQC inspected us. At every opportunity, we found out where the inspectors were, we went and spoke to them as chaplains. So on every ward where the inspectors were, a chaplain popped up. And the chaplaincy service was mentioned in the CQC report. And I mean, we happen to be an outstanding trust. And I think there is actually a correlation between the trusts who are deemed good by the CQC and the ones who actually support chaplaincy. So I know we're in a good position, but we have to be good political animals and be canny here, as we say in the North East, and make sure that people are aware of what we offer. And in the North East, we say shy bairns get out. Okay, so to constantly push and say, look what we can offer, so that when the mental health social worker in the city says, I've got a client who really needs some input from chaplaincy, can you see them? I'll say, yeah, we can, even though they're not a patient with us, to do that. So we need to push the boundaries for them to see where we can work and where we can help. So it's driving that demand in order to also get the supply to meet the demand.
Can we have a couple more questions from the floor?
One of the issues I had, ordained priest, and I was doing some work in the trust, and they wanted some support for staff. And I'm a trained psychodynamic therapist, and so I put this forward. They said, you're employed by a chaplain. That doesn't matter. So any other thing, I see them going hand in hand. But it was easily dismissed because I was employed as a chaplain. So I couldn't use any other qualification that I had that was pertinent to the job. And I don't quite know how to say, if you're going to have specialised chaplains, how do you make that relevant?
So I'm not talking about chaplains working as therapists in it. So we've actually had a member of our team who did work as a therapist on the same unit he was chaplain now, but he made sure he dressed differently, and that the patients he was working with knew that he was operating in that particular way. So I'm not talking about us doing other people's jobs. When I'm talking about specialism, I'm talking about the expertise that's needed to work with forensic patients or with dementia patients. So it isn't about being counsellors with a capital C, as in registered with the British Association. So it is about showing that expertise that we have as chaplains.
Yeah, I was doing it as such. I had this expertise that would be helpful in this situation. I wasn't looking to be a therapist.
But you can use those skills as a chaplain without.
I wasn't able to help big members of staff because
that is a shame.
it wasn't considered relevant.
I appreciate the trickiness of your position, because I've been a mental health nurse, staff nurse for over 30 years, and now I find myself in a part-time chaplain role just for 2 years in mental health, and it's really tricky for my brain not to think as a mental health nurse in my chaplaincy role. And in some ways, I do use those skills. I can't not use them. It's too much of my identity. But I have to be really careful, equally, that I don't cause myself problems and act in the role of a psychiatric mental health nurse when I'm there as a chaplain, which was probably part of the reason why I looked to go to a trust where I hadn't been known and worked as a mental health nurse. because I think you do have to be careful.
That's really helpful.
Is that made it?
Really helpful, yeah, it is. And so it is about understanding how others are working, but so we have a distinctive role here, and being careful there, yeah, sure.
Yeah, just maybe to talk more about this political public, the public face of us, because mostly by nature of our backgrounds, we tend to try and work more without promoting ourselves and the confidentiality of our work so what I wanted you to comment on is the actual evidential clinical footprint that we're leaving to show the evidence of the work that we're achieving and celebrating it in a way that doesn't sound like we're blowing our own trumpet, but to show that there has been significant change. How to capture that in a way that's professional, but yet with the integrity of confidentiality, but not just in the Rio notes or the fight that we've had to be able to access Rio notes, but in the public, or the NHS management way, through the statistics, yes, but that still can be hidden. I just wanted you to comment more about how do we improve that evidence, that footprint.
Thanks, Cheryl. Cheryl's in my team. I think in terms of the wider public thing, I think that's difficult to do because people don't understand what mental health care is, never mind mental health spiritual care. People run a mile from psychiatric hospitals, we're ghettos, it's where to shove people. But in terms of the evidential basis, that's why the chaplaincy research needs to happen, so that, the stuff that's happened on proms, for instance, and the interventions and where we can show as much as a psychologist. Who was it said psychology and psychiatry are hard sciences this afternoon? And I don't know who it was. I thought, what? And what's the illness here? Let's see which drug works, and we'll work out what type of dementia it is. So in terms of where we're at as chaplains, I think we can use the same tools as the psychologists. My wife says the reason we've managed to get more chaplains in our team is because we're cheaper than psychologists, but we do a similar job. She's a bit cynical there. But I think in terms of the clinical work, when we are in MDT and we make a wise contribution from a chaplaincy perspective. So for instance, there may be in an MDT, so they're all the nurses and everyone, and OTs and everyone are thinking their particular way about a patient. They, because they don't have the spiritual expertise, don't think, oh, there's something here that a chaplain can do. And so a chaplain being present can say, excuse me, I think I can work with this patient here. Now that won't happen if you only wheel the chaplain in for the particular patients who've already asked for them. So there has to be that welcoming of chaplains within the team, which is why the information governance stuff is a problem. In order to say there's ways of thinking here that we're just not engaging with if we don't have a chaplain present. As an example, our trust has just tried to streamline the care plan. Instead of a load of boxes saying these are the interventions we're going to do, we're just going to have a free form care plan, which the clinicians, using their expertise, are going to populate. And I spoke to the psychiatrist who's heading this. I said, you are expecting the clinicians to have the expertise to know what to put in the free form. There's no reminders, because like the tick box. And what you're doing there is you'll lose out on a lot of richness, and especially, I said, you'll lose out on chaplaincy. So I would like a reminder to clinicians that they need to think about chaplaincy. And she said, that's just for inpatients, though, isn't it? I said, no, it's even more important for care plans for outpatients, because the chaplains are present on the wards anyway. It's the outpatients that are not getting that input. So to answer you there, Cheryl, it's this constant challenge to remind people of the need for chaplaincy presence so that we can bring that expertise in that they just don't have.
Just hearing you speak, and thank you so much, and just having the opportunity to meet so many colleagues today has just reminded me of the importance of us learning from best practice from other trusts. And I get the feeling that as our own trust, we can get quite siloed into our way of doing things. I was wondering if you have any thoughts on how we kind of, maybe in a more structured way, go about learning best practice from other trusts, going to visit other trusts, seeing what they do well and what we might learn that actually we're doing quite well or differently from other people, whether you have anything that's worked, in particularly for your trust. Or
Well, I'm delighted that a neighbouring trust appointed a clinical lead chaplain to copy our model. There he is. I do think, it's the conversation with one another. It isn't so they think, oh, how rubbish we are. I say we're an outstanding trust, but as Speak and Speak Up Guardian, we get a lot of trouble in our trust. And I say to people, just because we're outstanding, it's not an absolute term, it's a relative term. So when you look at the problems we have in our chaplaincy team, think how difficult it is for others. We're all trying to improve. So we do need to listen to one another. We do need to read where research is. We do need to have conversation. We do need to have the forums. And I do think the online forums have been great because it has widened the participation of mental health chaplaincy teams. So all I can say is we just need to have those ongoing conversations, really, and learn from one another.
I've got a question for you, Neil, which is slightly devil's advocate question, but let's just liven things up a little bit. Many years ago, I read Stephen Patterson's brilliant book, actually, Pastoral Care and Liberation Theology. I don't know if he's read it. He sees the role of the chaplain in psychiatry as a person to align themselves with the oppressed. Is there not a danger in our alignment with the organisation in seeking to embed ourselves within the clinical information systems to step outside of that prophetic role?
So this, I hope we will explore fully tomorrow in the seminar. No, really, because that's the questions. Because we have become accepted as clinicians in our trust, have we sold out from the distinctive nature of chaplaincy? Now, part of it has been imposed on us. I won't say too much because I will do an introductory talk tomorrow. But part of it's been imposed on us by the trust wanting us to go into clinical uniform for IPC reasons under COVID. But I do think there's been a shift in the way that we've been thought of by, I will share one story with you, okay? By the way, this is not my normal language, okay, as I quote this. I was on the ward last week wearing my clinical uniform, and one of the patients said to me, can you take me out for a walk, please? And I said, you mean for a smoke? He said, yeah, can you take me out? I said, so what's your leave status at the moment? Are you allowed out? And he said, no, I've got to go with a member of staff. And I said, what you have to do, you have to go with a member of ward staff. And I'm not a member of this ward staff. I'm a member of staff, but I can't tell you, you'll have to ask one of the other members of the staff. And he said to me, well, what the fuck use are you then? Okay, so he had seen me as part of the normal staff, and I'd pushed back on that and said, I don't do that. There's something different. So you're quite right. In fact, Stephen Patterson taught me at Birmingham years ago, and he was constantly pushing at our thinking and to say, what is it we're taking for granted, and what do we need to step back from? So I do want to explore that tomorrow. We cannot go back in our trust to no longer wearing uniforms, clinical uniforms, because we've done it now. But I hope that the people who come to the seminars tomorrow will give me some help and pointers towards what we've lost and what we need to make sure that we don't, that prophetic role, that in the world but not of it in the Christian tradition. There's something distinctive about chaplain. I mean, it goes down to Rio notes, for instance. What do we put on notes? How do we show our difference by the way so we can get away with saying half an hour chaplain's visit. Other people can't. But that also gives some help to the patient to know that not everything they share with us will go down, whether they are kempt, for instance. or whether they've got body odour at the moment, which other people were picking up. We don't need to worry about that. Well, there is something different about the nature of the conversations we have. So we don't, and that I think it relates to the conversation about not acting like other clinicians do as therapists. There is something different about being alongside people. We can also do that by, I was with a patient last week, I sat down with him, and he said, can you please move away? You're in my space. I said, oh fine, that's fine. So I just sat down next to him, please move away. So I said, that's fine, I'll move. You obviously don't want to talk to me, that's fine. And then later on he found out I was a chaplain, he was so apologetic. I said, no, it doesn't matter, you didn't want to talk to me. So there are, whatever we do, there are different ways of looking. I mean, like for instance, do you wear a collar when you go on a ward? Okay? Do you, if you're entitled to wear one? Only once have I worn a collar on a ward and someone's come to me under the ward and said, I was praying for a man of God to come and speak to you. And he was a Muslim. Okay, so it doesn't, but it opens doors to us, but also shuts conversations down as well. So that I hope will be the conversation tomorrow. And I don't want to shut down the conversation now, but come to the seminar tomorrow, and we can continue that conversation, because there are implications about the way we dress and what we look like in terms of how we're treated by patients and staff alike.
I'm going to. Do you want to say something, sir? You'll be the last one.
So I work in acute and mental health. So I work in West Hertfordshire NHS trusts, covering 3 hospitals. So in that trust, the chaplaincy team is non-clinical. So we don't do the training that is required, the mandatory training that clinical staff are required to do. But so there's pros and cons to, and when I work in a mental health trust, we are part of the clinical team. So the difference that I've noticed is this. Firstly, departments don't notice you too much when you're non-clinical. You're kind of, you're non-clinical, move away. The issue becomes then with all the other non-clinical departments like patient affairs and others. So mentioned about blowing our own trumpet. I think we should do that if the need arises. I don't see anything wrong with that. And the reason is because every single time we used to have our meetings, the thing is that the other non-clinical departments, they would, yes, we've done this, and chaplains would say, stay quiet. So it seems as if we weren't doing much, and we have all our records and our Excel sheets and so on. But that becomes the issue. So then we have to say, hey, wait a minute, how many patients have we seen? We've numbered them and so on. And in the mental health trust, because we are clinical, all the other departments take us seriously. So as soon as you send the email, you're getting an email back saying, oh, welcome, new chaplain. Okay, well, can you attend our MDT this morning? So we get a more of a response.
Yeah, that shows where we're at really, and to be taken seriously. I think we're out of time now.
Thank you very much. Now you started a new tradition now within the Mental Health Forum AGM. It's really good to have you with us. Maybe it's about time you've been with us and shared what you've got to share. Thank you very much, everybody, for attending tonight. And I hope you continue to be part of the open forums going ahead into the end of November. We've got one then in 2023. And Simon, just wants to say a couple of words before we depart.
Yeah, just say a couple of words. Sorry I wasn't here at the beginning, but I was at the welcoming the new people to the conference session, so it could be about. I just think it's important to reiterate, I know it's already been said, how important the mental health forum is within the college. I think what Neil was saying was very obvious in terms of when NHS England produced a document and a draft that was inadequate. It was wonderful to be able to say, there is a group you can come to, and there's only one group you can come to. You can't go out to some random person you're paying a bunch of money to. You've got to come to this forum, and that's where you'll find the expertise. It was just, I think it was just fairly straightforward, wasn't it? And they had to, and they did. So I think that is superb. I hope the same will apply to Scotland and to Northern Ireland and to Wales when they come to their planning. The second thing is to say, and just to embarrass Jeremy just for a moment, because he has been a very, very clear advocates, that's a bit American there, doesn't it? Advocate of mental health chaplaincy for the last few years, absolutely clear. I will embarrass him by saying he has sent me emails saying, Simon, this is not good enough. I've noticed this has come out, and I know you're a mental health chaplain by background, but I think you've forgotten. Is that about fair? I had at least one like that, and a couple of calls that were more discreet. He has absolutely been championing, and I just, A, want to say thank you to him for doing that within the college, and B, just ask you all to continue that voice, because it's so vital for chaplaincy. But thank you, Jeremy.
And if you could give a hand in putting the run back to how it was before.
Right.